Hello, everybody. Welcome to Away Games, a Chicago Cubs and baseball podcast hosted by two comedians who live in New York but still love the Cubs. My name is Adam Mamawala. I am usually joined by the smooth, dulcet tones of one Kevin McCaffrey, but today we've got an even deeper baritone for you. It's your boy, fan favorite Ken Schultz in the house, pinch hitting for Kevin. Ken, how's it going?
It's going well, Adam. Testing for your love.
Ooh, well, the love you have.
Reference to a Barry White commercial from 20 years ago. That's the best I got.
Honestly, that's a pretty new reference for your
Yeah,
usual standard of references on this
yeah.
podcast.
It's in
Make
color.
sure
That's good.
make sure to follow us at Away Games Pod on Elon Musk's favorite app and also Instagram. It makes sense that the thing we're most present on is the thing that is crumbling. In any case, check us out over there at Away Games Pod. And
That
Ken,
also
let's
applies to the planet Earth. So,
Yes, that is true. Also crumbling. Happy belated Earth Day to all who celebrate. Um, well, we lost a series. Cubs lost a series to the Dodgers. Lost 3 out of 4. But we're recording this after a 6-0 victory last night over the San Diego Padres, in which Justin Steele continued to friggin' shove. And the Cubbies are 13-9 as we head into the end of the first month. Ken, we haven't spoken since spoken into microphones, I should say, since the season preview pod. How are you feeling about this group of Cubbies after almost a month?
I mean, it's certainly better than not the way they're playing right now in terms of like emotionally. It's still complicated. I think it's going to be for the foreseeable future, but
Yeah.
it's the kind of complicated where at least it's watchable. Like when we had our group discussion on Facebook at the end of last season, and we're all kind of expressing that giant sigh of relief that it was just kind of over. I think I mentioned at one point that the goals for next year that I wanted were just fun and relevance. And so far, 2 for 2, honestly, with that. So if that's what it's going to be for 6 months, yeah, I'm kind of good on that end.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's nice to be nearing the end of April and not feel like the season is already in the tank. Like, I feel like last year we did not really have a lot of time to even dream on the Cubs being competitive. It was pretty clear immediately that that was not going to be the case. So yeah, it feels good. I think Justin Steele really since I don't know, kind of since becoming a dad. Is that what we attribute this to? I feel like basically since the beginning of last year, his ERA is like 1.5, something like that. He has been very, very good. What impressions did you have over the weekend of the Dodgers series? I mean, obviously you don't want to be losing 3 out of 4 to anyone at home, but ultimately 7 games with the Dodgers over the course of a week, you win 3 out of 7. You're not killing yourself over that, but it's still after winning 2 of 3 in LA, it's not the kind of weekend you wanted to have.
Yeah, I think it's part of the old classic baseball cliche of sometimes it's not who you play, it's when you play them.
Yeah.
And the both Dodger series were kind of a contrast in that the first one at Dodger Stadium felt like that kind of early on Dodger feeling where they're still kind of finding out what their strengths are and who they are. And
Mm-hmm.
their lineup really felt especially top heavy in that
Yeah.
series. That, Muncy was starting to hit a bit and Outman was hitting, but Betts was kind of
That name makes me
mediocre.
shudder, Outman.
Yeah, yeah, a little bit at this point. Yeah, it is the exact opposite of what his name means
Yeah.
is yeah, it's Outman, maybe the human antonym would be a good description of how he plays,
Yeah.
um
Jeez.
at
Anyway.
least against the Cubs. But once you got to like 5, 6, and 7 in the Dodger lineup, especially in LA, it felt like, okay, we can kind of take a breath here. It didn't have that quality that they've had in past years of, oh my God, it just wears you down over and
Right.
over, like guy with power, guy with power, guy with power, guy with power. Like when you're batting Jason Hayward sixth, that's usually a message being sent to the world. Love you, Jay Hay, but we also know who you are at this point.
Right.
And when they got to Wrigley, it felt like that they some of it was really starting to click much more than it had the week before. And they had like a 5-run comeback against the Pirates last night. They were down by 5 and
Wow.
ended up making it up, winning it. So I
You
think
mean
they're
the
kind
first
of
place Pirates or second place Pirates?
yes, yes, yeah. The Dodgers going out and beating the class of the National League Central. Who knew?
Unbelievable.
Um, But that kind of makes me think that, okay, with as many people who are starting to hit home runs in that lineup now, that they've just started becoming the Dodgers again in time for the Cubs to play them in that series. So that's, I
Right.
think, a great deal why they ended up losing 3-4, because most of those games were decided by home runs, like
Hmm.
the grand slam by Outman in game one on Thursday, um, Muncy and Outman going off on Saturday against Wisniewski in the bullpen, and then all the home runs against Stroman on Sunday. So that's how the Dodgers win. And the
Right.
Cubs happened to run into them at the time where the ball was leaving the park again. So that, I think, in a nutshell, after I speak for 5 minutes and blather on, I think is what
No,
happened in that
I
series.
that's why I asked you. I mean, and obviously there have been some bullpen issues. The fact that Jason Hayward has been walked twice in front of James Outman hitting home runs. I mean, that is just one of those cannot happen sort of things.
Why
Um,
would you nibble against Jason Hayward?
I do not
Why?
know. I
Just
do not
accept
know.
the 4-3 ground out.
Exactly, exactly. So yeah, I mean, obviously Michael Fulmer has been a surprisingly hard name to say. Michael Fulmer has not looked great, and David Ross has looked very stubborn about it. I'm not sure why. Actually, I'm trying to figure that out.
It's Michael Fulmer appears to be this year's, I don't know, let's throw the name Kevin Gregg out there as just a random Cub
Hmm.
relief pitcher that they signed in the offseason thinking, okay, here's the guy that's going to close for us. And then he goes out there and just throws up shit. And nobody has any idea why, but they keep going to him for a month or two before they realize, okay, we got to do something else with this.
Yeah, and what I don't understand about it is the positions that they're putting him in. Where, sure, if we're talking about the game on Thursday where Outman hits the grand slam, like, yeah, to that point he struggled, but he's still the guy you want to trust in that situation. But you look at a game like Sunday that the Cubs are down two going into the ninth, and you run him out there, seemingly trying to have him right the ship, but that's not the time to do it. Like, get him out there in a blowout. I don't understand why you have him out there when the Cubs are very much within striking distance.
Yeah, I think some of the thinking with that was that he threw him out there, threw up out there. I'll just throw that out
He
there.
did throw up out there, yeah.
Yes. With the bottom half of the Dodger lineup coming up. And he actually got the first two outs in that inning with very little problem, and then
Yeah.
gave up a couple base runners. And then at that point, unfortunately, now low power Michael Fulmer is facing Mookie Betts. And we
Right.
saw what happened, double in the left field corner, and the game is suddenly out of reach again.
Yeah.
So I think it was more based on kind of the facts that I mentioned before, that the Dodgers lineup, once you get to that bottom half of it, is a little easier than it's been in past years. So I think Ross thought maybe we can kind of steal a confidence builder out of this if he goes a quick 1-2-3 against the Hayward and the other Haywards of the
Right.
Dodger lineup. And it just turned out that he had 2/3 of the way done and then
Right.
turned back into the Michael Fulmer we've seen in pretty much every outing. And that's kind of also a hallmark of when you sign random closer and you think he's going to be good and he just keeps throwing up awful outings, because even when you put him out there thinking, okay, this is advantageous for him to get his confidence back,
Hmm.
and he shits the bed again.
Right.
That's kind of a pattern. I don't know why it seemed to happen like that way over and over, but that happens a lot with Cub closers, it seems like.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, the Cubs were an out away from what would have been a sweep. And it's one of those, like, maybe if the Cubs win Saturday, the Dodgers really feel like they have to come out and win Sunday, and the Cubs don't get the sweep anyway. But obviously that one was tough out in
Yeah.
LA. And since then, it's not really improved when you look at Fulmer's numbers.
Yeah. And it's
Now,
interesting
yeah,
how
go
it
ahead.
compounds itself a little bit, because that
Right.
Saturday outing was essentially a BABIP hit. It was a ground ball just
Oh,
out of
yeah.
a diving Horner. So you could write that off
If
as,
anything, they just
well,
shouldn't have pitched to him.
right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was bad strategy. And Fulmer was the one who was kind of at the core of that, because Fulmer decided he wanted to go after uh, Batista.
Peralta. Yeah.
Um,
Peralta.
Peralta, yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And but you could write that off as like, okay, that's bad luck. But it's interesting how that kind of leads to like almost a cascade of mental boulders where it
Sure.
still feels like, oh God, I blew this one. And then he comes in, on Thursday and just gets utterly destroyed by
Hmm.
Outman on that grand slam. And then now it's really unstoppable,
Right.
that negative momentum. And I feel for him. It's tough to fight back once that's in your head. I mean, we've been there both as performers, at least
Hmm.
I have, and
Yeah.
maybe I'm making assumptions here, but where it just feels like I don't know how to
A
make.
cascade of boulders is how I describe my whole career. So you're on to something here.
you are Buster Keaton being chased down the hill in Seven Chances. How is that for a silent era reference into our
That is more than 20 years
2023
old. That is more
podcast?
like 1920s than 20 years old.
Yes, yes, all-time classic, Seven Chances, by the way. But yeah, I feel for him, but I also kind of want to feel for him while he's not blowing games for us anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. Now you have been to Wrigley how many times this year? A couple,
Three
three?
times, yes,
And what's your personal record?
2-1. So
Okay. All right.
I've equaled last year already.
That I mean that is pretty good. So as the only person of this kind of podcast cohort who has been to a game, I don't think Kevin's been to a game. What have the vibes been like at the old ballpark?
They've been very good so far. And honestly, as someone who, as I mentioned earlier, is feeling it's complicated emotionally with this team still.
Right.
Being in Wrigley is, I've found, the best place to kind of work through that and just kind of lose yourself in the emotional ups and downs of the game in
Mm-hmm.
front of you. It's very easy right now when you're there to just get caught up in what you see in front of your face and not have to kind of deal with all of the, oh God, I miss Wilson Contreras, I miss Anthony Rizzo,
Mm-hmm.
fire Jed, sell the team, that runs through
Right.
my head in pretty much a 24/7 loop otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went on opening day just by myself, but it was really nice to kind of just be there and high five strangers when good things were happening
Mm-hmm.
again. And went there for the Nico walk-off against the
Oh yeah.
Mariner, which was delightful, and kind of getting surprised by the W lights at the end of that one was like the extra special cherry on top of it. It's like, this was a great game, and oh my God, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. And even on Sunday, when I went to go see the finale, going to see Clayton Kershaw against Stroman was
Right.
incredible. And the crowd was like a typical Cubs game. Like, even though they were getting, it was really difficult after that first inning. Like, outside of the Gomes home run in the fifth, there was
Mm-hmm.
very little offense until the fake rally in the ninth. But once they started that fake rally, like, everybody was still there. And as soon as they loaded the bases, like, everybody knew, okay, we are on our feet and we're going
Right.
to go off and try to will this thing to happen. And we willed Nick Madrigal to ground it to a double play.
I
So
tell you what,
there you
what
go.
a time for that first home run that would have been.
Oh, would that have been a moment to that would, like, if that's how you end a game, like even in April, like you get a sense of, okay, this could start becoming special. But
Right.
yeah, I mean, Nick Madrigal made contact as he does
Sure.
right into right to Mookie Betts, and yeah, I mean, it ended in a disappointing way, but it was still like, okay, yeah, this is what it should feel like. So
Right.
yeah, I would say going to Wrigley right now is the best way to kind of enjoy this team.
Yeah, and we've already kind of had that signature game. I mean, I think the 7-0 comeback against the Mariners was the grand slam in that game obviously is one of those kind of Taylor Davis-esque
Yeah.
moments that in a season, depending on how it goes, you do look back at those moments early and say like, oh, that maybe that was a thing, and it doesn't always work out that way. Like the David Bodie home run happened in 2018, and I think if the Cubs made a longer run, that would be talked about more in terms of like, oh yeah, that was the game that we knew that this team was going to do something special. You can always cherry pick those sorts of things to fit the narrative of how a season ends, but I feel I know what this answer is going to be, but we're recording this after a night in which Jan Gomes was 4 for 4, had a big game, hit a home run, drove in I think 3 runs, threw somebody out at second. Are you able to enjoy that, or are you just dreading it, or feeling complicated about it because you're like, well, I'm happy he did that, but now I just know that Cubs Twitter is going to be annoying.
Yeah. That one, honestly, that particular one is not complicated. The response is still, that's nice, don't care, don't want you here.
Mm,
That's yeah, that is, catcher is the one position where I just don't think I'm going to make it emotionally with either Gomes or Barnhart. That to me kind of symbolizes it's in a nutshell. And both players seem like perfectly fine people and probably even fun people to hang out with. But
yeah.
uh, that just is still kind of the symbol of what the awful things about this era of Cubs
Mm-hmm.
baseball, the turning our back on the cornerstone of 2016, when he went to management and told them, what do I need to do to stay a Cub? And was
Right.
stonewalled. And watching the fan base then go full meatball on him and go full Red Sox fans turning on Johnny Damon
Mm-hmm.
on him has also been been difficult. So yeah, I kind of mentally, unfortunately, take that out on Gomes and Barnhart, but I can't feel things that aren't there, honestly. Like
Yeah,
it's good that it helps the Cubs in the long run, but yeah, I just can't make myself feel good about either of them or care about either of them, even when you have an incredible
right.
game like Gomes had last night.
Yeah, and I think I haven't looked at Wilson's numbers recently, but I'm very curious to see what we're gonna get from Cubs Twitter if and when he goes on a hot streak and all of a sudden he's hitting 320 and has a 5 home runs in a week,
Mhm.
and if it's going to just be quiet or if people are going to find some way to still criticize it. All just seems wildly immature and frankly has like turned me off to a not insignificant segment of Cubs Twitter that I otherwise like had very good feelings about. um I'm
Yeah.
curious to get
Staying
your
off Twitter.
take. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say,
Oh,
staying off Twitter during the games. I'm completely off Twitter this year,
that's good.
and that's been very
Good
beneficial.
boundaries.
Yeah, yeah. I've found I'm paying attention to what's in front of me more. I'm staying more
Hmm.
present in the game itself, and I'm not looking for ways to get mad. Like I still find ways to get mad. Like in my
Sure.
head, I I have, as I told you in the Facebook chat, a constant battle with Jed Hoyer in my head, which does none of us any good. But
Right.
again, can't feel feelings that aren't there. Um, and so just kind of staying away from that until after the game
Hmm.
does kind of help separate my mind from it and allow me to more emotionally commit to the team that's in front of me. So recommended. I know it's hard, but I found that that's very beneficial.
Yeah.
And
Now,
also,
yeah.
that I wanted to remember that the one tweet I did see after the game, Joe Kilgallen last night, you're talking about what will happen when Wilson goes on a hot streak. Even with the awful start Wilson has had, Joe Kilgallen pointed out that he still has .8 WAR on the season compared to Gomes at the very top of his game, .3. So,
Right.
like, I know everyone's going to argue that there are soft catcher values that you can't
Hmm.
really focus on, or but I mean, you're talking about Wilson at his very worst versus Gomes at his very best, and it's still very obviously Wilson Contreras the better catcher. I don't know what other arguments you need. There you go.
Yeah. Now, in general, when we think about that, like, at what point is it okay to acknowledge that perhaps not extending certain players was actually the right move? Like, do you feel like you can get there emotionally in the same way that, like, yes, we all wanted Arrieta to resign, he didn't. The Cubs signed Yu Darvish, they traded him, which was idiotic, but like that was the right move. When you look at the kind of season or the couple of seasons that a guy like Javi has had, does that, I don't want to say make you feel any better, but like I think I consider a lot what would it be like if the Cubs had signed Javi to a big extension and then he were playing this way for us. I do think people would turn on him, and in some ways I'm relieved that we didn't have to see that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, that is a good point, and it is. I guess at the very least, that kind of allows everybody that was part of that core to be part of now what's kind of essentially a time capsule,
Right.
where what they did that was great with the Cubs will always be like that level of great. And we don't have to worry about kind of them sullying it with like a 2021 Arrieta return performance, for example.
Right, right, right.
But I think, well, in the case of Javi, I kind of think that part of his struggles have at least something to do with the fact that he's playing for a dead in the water Tigers team,
Right.
where it feels like he especially might really need that sense of what I'm doing is contributing to something important, as
Hmm.
opposed to just kind of trying to find ways to motivate myself while my team just plays out the string from April 15th on. You look at how he performed in the World Baseball Classic, for example, that I don't have his numbers in front of me, but I know that he did very well for Puerto
Right.
Rico. And that's just a 2 week sample, but he was engaged, and every one of those games had importance. So it's a theory, but I don't think it's completely out of the realm of possibility to think that if he went back, if they found a way to get him back onto a contender, he might turn into something like the Javi that we're familiar with. That's again, a
Yeah.
theory, and it could well be bullshit, but
No,
Um,
I think that's a valid point,
but
and in fairness, part of being a professional is still doing your job even when the stakes aren't there. But I do think that for someone like him who's as competitive as he is, that could certainly be a factor.
mhm. And I think that it would also be easier to kind of get to a place mentally where you describe, where you're kind of at peace with maybe some of the moves that, in retrospect, yeah, I'm glad we didn't have to extend that for big money. If they would have picked one, like
Hmm.
if you could have picked
Rizzo,
somebody from
yeah,
that group. Yeah. Yeah. So I was about to ask you, so the Cubs right now, as we both know, at first base and designated hitter are both near the bottom of the league
yeah,
offensively.
yeah.
Like I want to say bottom five, maybe for both positions.
Hmm.
So do you think perhaps it could help to lengthen the lineup if the Cubs had someone with a slash line of 286, 378, 512, five home runs, 148 ops plus? Would that be okay to add to the lineup? Could you
I
use that, do you
I
think?
think it would. Now, would this particular player have a wiener dog named Kevin also? Because that's a you can't put a price
Yeah,
tag on
yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's also beneficial toward kind of clubhouse harmony and just good vibes in general. It seems like you might have wanted to hang on to that, especially because he's making what, 17 million a year
Not a
this
lot.
year?
Yeah, I think it was two for
Yeah,
32. Now let
yeah.
me ask you this question in the interest of trying to focus on the Cubs as they're constituted and not get too bogged down in
Mhm.
our
Yeah.
grievances about the
Mhm.
past. There's been a lot of talk on Cubs Twitter about like when are we going to see Matt Mervis? When are we going to see Matt Mervis? And I understand it. Matt Mervis is playing well down at AAA. He the Cubs platoon of Hosmer and Mancini. Mancini went on like a little kind of mini hot streak, but I think long term, like these are not people who are going to be part of the Cubs' future. I feel like that's fairly obvious. The one thing I do wonder about both of those guys, and particularly Hosmer, is that in the way that Jason Hayward's value to the Cubs was always much more than numbers. I do wonder the extent to which a guy like an Eric Hosmer has been of value in that clubhouse. And that's not a reason to keep someone on a team if they're hitting 180, but um, I'm curious about that in terms of the discussion of when we might see someone get called up. And we've heard now from the Cubs front office that nothing is imminent, that they are kind of standing pat with what they have. But do you feel like there's a world in which like that is part of this? Is
Oh
that
yeah.
they feel like the clubhouse vibes are good and they don't want to disrupt that because the team is, they're not blowing the world away, but they're 13-9.
Yeah, I think that's a very good thought, and I think that that has a lot to do with it. That Hosmer obviously was on that 2014, 2015 Royals team, and probably was one of the hearts of that team when it comes down to it, especially
Absolutely.
considering it was his base running that led to the game tying rally and ended up leading to their World Series winning Game Five. That's the kind of thing that I'm sure is part of the intangibles that he brings.
Hmm.
Maybe not on the field so much, but I'm sure is reflected in the way that he relates to teammates. And we know Mancini is just a mensch. That
Yeah.
everybody in baseball speaks so highly of him. And I
Mancini.
would, yes, yes, Mancini. Oh, I love it. That new obvious shirt. That's excellent. And I would say that it's definitely good to consider that as value as long as the rest of the lineup is hitting at the level it is right now. Like the Cubs have like one of the best, if not the best offense in baseball. Did you see that coming? I didn't see that coming. And
Right.
yeah, I'm not sure how sustainable that is. Like you're going to see a few guys, I'm sure, regress to the mean. Like Patrick Wisdom is probably not going to be on a 70 home run pace for the entire year.
You bite
Um,
your tongue.
yeah, yeah. I bite my tongue every time I see the cut of that man's chin. Yes,
He's a
making it
handsome
creepy.
man, no
Okay.
question about it.
Yes, yeah. But Bellinger obviously is off to the incredible start. Dansby is interesting right now that he's the exact opposite of the kind of hitter that I expected him to be. That he's very on base heavy with no power, and I
Right.
expect that to reverse itself in both aspects. And
Hmm.
by the end of
Yeah,
the
still
year,
waiting for that first home run, right?
yeah, yeah. And so I'm just kind of going through them in my head one by one here. Nico obviously is hitting 350
Nico's
at
been great. Hap's
he's
been
going to be
great.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So everybody's and who's hitting at that level kind of has to sustain something like that in order to make the Hosmer Mancini thing work, or Mancini has to start hitting much better than he has. Because if any of them regress at a certain point, you're suddenly going to start looking at the bottom of that lineup and seeing, Hosmer with his, 280, no power, barely cracking 100 ops plus, if that,
Right.
followed by Jan Gomes. Like that is a bottom of the order that is going to eventually be kind of like falling off a cliff.
Hmm.
And so, and that's when we're going to start looking at it and going, okay, does what you're bringing in the clubhouse really kind of override the fact that you're a millstone dragging this lineup down?
Hmm.
So, if the top of this lineup can keep doing what they're doing for as long as they can, we can put this question off, answering this question off for as long as we can.
Right.
But once a few of those guys start kind of going back to what we expect out of them and kind of regressing back to their normal stat lines, that's when you're really going to start hearing calls from Matt Mervis, and hopefully he'll be ready at that point.
Yeah, and we're also not always going to get such good starting pitching from people. Like it's
No,
just not. It's not going to happen. Speaking of which, I can't believe we haven't mentioned this yet. Drew Smiley, my God, I mean the absolute game of his life, and a genuinely excruciating way for a perfect game bid to end.
from our
Yeah,
defense first catcher. Yeah.
hey, you know what? I did appreciate the comedy involved in Jan Gomes rocking a football
Mm-hmm.
helmet, giving his
Yeah.
post game interview. I honestly I don't know that either of them make the play anyway. That it's
No.
one of those like you couldn't roll it out there better than that if you were
Right.
trying to sort of plays, and it just a home run always sucks because then it's like, well, there goes the perfect game no hitter and shutout. But at least if it was like a hard line drive, it makes you feel a little bit better. But um, yeah, I mean, talk about a fun game to have been at for anybody who was out at the ballpark on Friday. Going back to Hosmer, he's very Hayward like. I mean, he has the thing where it's like he hits the ball hard, but a lot of ground balls, a lot of
Mhm.
easy outs. But then every once in a while, he'll hit a ball 420 feet to left center, and you're like, what did I just see? Like, where is that all the time? And you feel like if there were a way to, not to be this guy, but to figure out that launch angle a little bit better, maybe you would have something. But I think he kind of is who he is at this point, and it's probably best for us to acknowledge that. The defense is still fine. It's not like what it used to be. He's getting older, but yeah, I think the takeaway from all of this is that if you told me or if I told you a month ago when we were doing our season preview, hey, the Cubs are going to be 13-9 after the first 23 games, would you take that? I think you take that in a heartbeat. And if the Cubs can continue to be 13-9, I think they have a real shot at a wild card. It's also entirely possible they go 10-20 in May, and we're sitting here a month from now saying, well, I guess they weren't that good to begin with, but it is nice to be a month into the season and still be able to believe in this team.
Yeah. Yeah, to that point, we really have not seen them slump yet. Like that's
No.
going to be kind of one of the determining factors is what happens when they have a week where suddenly the top half of the order stops hitting in this way.
Hmm.
And then it just kind of becomes, a dead spot for a while. Or if,
Right.
God forbid, Steele might eventually have a bad game and suddenly we have a rough turn or two through the rotation. And that's, yeah, we'll see what happens at that point. That will kind of show us what exactly this team is made of, because
Right.
I don't think they're going to be on a pace for 110 wins for the entire year. So yeah, until we get to that point, it's enjoy the ride as best we can, because this is unexpected. This is, as I said, fun and relevant, and yeah, that feels kind of like a bonus right now.
It absolutely does. And for reference, right now the Cubs are on pace to win between 95 and 96 games. So, I mean,
Sure.
I tell you what, that gets you in the playoffs for sure.
Yeah,
It
that
might not
sounds
win the
good.
division because apparently the Pirates are amazing, despite losing O'Neill Cruz, and the Brewers, despite losing all their pitching, are still very good. Nothing makes sense anymore.
Mhm.
Meanwhile, the Cardinals are not good. It's all very strange, but it's also very early, and that is how baseball works. But to your point about not slumping, to me, the mark of a really good, solid baseball team is you avoid the 3 game losing streak.
Yeah.
Even if you lose 2 games in a row, you find a way to not lose that third, and that's exactly what the Cubs did last night. They're coming off two straight losses against the Dodgers, having lost 2 of 3, and they go out and look really sharp against a good Padres team, and that's a good sign. So We will see how it goes. Any other thoughts before we wrap this up here?
Um, Fire Jed sell the team. Let's go with that. Yeah.
I think I don't know if he appears at Cubs conventions, but I'm surprised that there's not been a George W. Bush like incident where you throw a shoe at Jed Hoyer and then immediately throw a second shoe. I don't know if his reflexes are as good as George W. Bush. Arguably, his best asset are his reflexes, George
Yes.
W. But yeah, so fire Jed, sell the team. That's evergreen. That is Ken's new Twitter handle. But if they want to find you at the old one, where can the people find you? And
Yes.
what are you doing these days?
I am at Ken Schultz _ on Twitter, at Ken Thin Guy on Instagram, and writing a couple pieces every week for Outsports. This week we are looking back at the 10-year anniversary of Jason Collins coming out back when he was an active player with the Nets in the NBA.
Very cool and interesting that you mentioned it because I actually got to attend Pride Night at the Barclays Center, and Jason Collins came out and was a part of a presentation.
Yeah, he is one of the most impressive people in all of sports still today. Just a really thoughtful, engaging guy who we're really glad to be one of the leaders of LGBTQ athletes everywhere.
Absolutely, I love it. Well, folks, other than that, you can find us at Away Games over here at Away Games Pod. You can find me at Adam Mamawala. If anybody is in the Colorado area, I'll be out in Boulder for a weekend of shows headlining out there May 11th, 12th, and 13th. Got a bunch of stuff in New York coming up as well. But other than that, let's keep playing well. We've got another couple games against the Padres, and then a stretch where you really should do some damage. You got a bunch of games against the Marlins and Nationals. The Marlins aren't bad. The Nationals are.
Mhm.
So interesting to see how that'll go. It's also kind of interesting to see the way they've been scheduling everything, where you feel like you keep playing the same team back
Yeah,
to back series or every other series.
yeah,
I don't know.
that's the
It's
side
fine.
effect of having to play everybody in a year is all of
Right.
a sudden like, okay, we got to and that's happening for everybody in baseball. You're
Yeah.
having those back-to-back home and away series. That's like, okay, now we're done with the Dodgers. And I mean, that's great for the rest of the year, but
Yeah.
yeah, it is weird in many
It is.
ways. Like, but it was going to feel weird regardless because that's the life and the new rules of 2023.
Indeed, indeed. All right, folks. Well, two more against the Padres. Hopefully, get a series win here. Head into the weekend feeling good, and otherwise have a good rest of the week. And we'll be back next week. I imagine with our old pal Kevin McCaffrey. But Ken, thanks again for hopping in.
Always a pleasure. Go Cubs.